If you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself, feel free to continue doing so in the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and get us started because it is high noon here in Colorado. So welcome to CSL in Session. My name is Christine Krieger, and I am the Professional Development Consultant for the Colorado State Library. And we are delighted to bring you our CSL in Session for today, Serving Older Adults. Before we get started with the actual session, I just want to tell you a little bit about CSL in Session in case you haven't had the chance to attend before. So you might be used to webinars where we just kind of talk at you for an hour and you just fill your brain with lots of stuff. And we are going to fill your brain today, I promise you that. But we're going to also shake things up a little bit, and there will be times where we'll have you use the chat to answer questions. So thank you for practicing that by introducing yourselves. We also have a poll for you today and other parts where you are going to be interacting with us. The main way that you're going to interact, as I mentioned before, is via the chat. Which is located in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. So once again, you can practice using that to introduce yourself. If you need to get a hold of me for any reason, you're having audio issues or something, all the way up at the top where the host is, you see Colorado State Library. If you hover over that, you can send me a private message, and as soon as I'm done with introductions, I can help troubleshoot things. We are also recording today's session, and it will be available hopefully sometime tomorrow on the not the CSL in Session website, on the Libraries Learn website. So holler if you are having any issues. And then we also do have live closed captioning for today. If I am correct, Anthony is our captioner for today. And you can turn captions on or off. If you go to the upper part of the screen, you should see the CC button, and you can turn them on or off, move them around the screen, make them as big or as small as you want. Or if you prefer something separate, we also have a link that I am posting in chat. So if you want it in a separate window, you can use the link that I just added to chat. So without further ado, it is my sincere pleasure to introduce Amy Del Poe, who is Manager of Older Adult Services at Denver Public Library, and she's got lots of great information to share with you today. So I'm going to pull up her slides and turn it over to Amy.
Thank you, Christine. Can you hear me okay? I'm assuming you can.
I can. Sorry, I had to figure out how to unmute myself again.
No, that's okay. Hi, everybody. I'm excited to see so many of you here. I just came back from ALA in Chicago, and I can attest that the library profession remains pretty youth-oriented. There was a lot for youth, a lot for teens, and just a small smattering of stuff for older adults. So I'm really excited that you're here and you're interested in this topic. As Christine said, I'm Amy Del Poe. I'm the manager of older adult services at the Denver Public Library. We're really lucky there that we have a department devoted to older adults. We define older adult as anyone 50 plus, which a lot of people don't like, just to be honest. They think that they don't want to be identified as being older when they're in their 50s or even their 60s. And there are a lot of reasons we start at 50 that I can talk about later. But I think it means that my work covers a really broad spectrum of life experiences and stages. So I'll talk more about that in my presentation. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to do a little exercise in checking ourselves. And then I'm going to want to hear a little bit from you about who you are. And then I'm going to talk about the latest on aging in terms of development, neurology, brain changes, personality changes, and the implications of that for public libraries. And then we'll look at ageism, which is something I'm sure we've all experienced, and it's something that really permeates our culture. And finally, I'll kind of end with an overview of how we approach older adult services based on everything else that you learned. So first, I just kind of want to check ourselves and for you all to put in the chat, when I say the word old, what other words come to mind? What words do you associate? What concepts do you associate with the word old? Gray hair, yeah, for sure. Experience wise, I like those. Senior citizen, worn out, yeah. Mature, senior, interesting. A cane, that's very interesting. Tired, slowing down, retired, yep. Free time. So the list you all are giving me is pretty interesting. It's pretty mixed. Wise, yep. So I'm going to go ahead. So generally speaking, if you look at other words associated with aging and old and our culture, you get a lot of words on this list. Declining, forgetful, vulnerable. Some of them are not horrible words, but they're all kind of deficit-based words that are sort of rooted in an ageist view of aging. And it's not that these words are always wrong. Some of them are always wrong. For example, unable to learn in that last column, that's always wrong. We know now that people can learn right up until the moment they die. And so that's never true. But some of these are sometimes true. Some of them are, depending on the person, never true. But the problem with this list, when you look at it through the lens of public library service, is traditionally public library services for older adults is more based in this list. It's more deficit-based stuff. It's what I call the rocking chair model of older adult services. It's things like large print books and homebound services and services to nursing homes and programs about Medicare. And those programs are very important programs to do. And I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I'm saying they're just a really small slice of what we should be doing when we serve older adults, because it's missing so much. So this is kind of my dorky thing, is when you only look at one little tiny piece of what it means to age, that deficit-based piece of what it means to age, you kind of miss the big, beautiful, complicated picture. And that's the picture I'm going to want us to look at today together. What is the complicated, beautiful, potential-based picture of aging that we can bring to older adults in our communities and to ourselves? And one thing about this training that I have found, as I've done it all over the country, actually, is it really helps people understand and look forward to their own aging journeys. So I hope that that will happen for you as well. Okay, so here's another opportunity to share. If you don't mind, and some people do mind, but if you don't mind, could you put in the chat your age and maybe something hard about being your age? And I will say, for me, I'm 55. That's my age. And the hardest thing about being my age is the ageism in our culture. I feel very diminished and marginalized by it. So 59, declining health. 25, being independent from parents is hard. Interesting. My joints at 58, I hear that. 22, the uncertainty about my future. Yeah. Arthritis at 43. So you can see that no matter what your age, there is something hard, right? Oh, and 24, imposter syndrome. 37, still hearing lots of damn millennials. Yeah. Victoria, I love your answer. 43, nothing really. You're kind of smack in the middle. 66, feeling invisible, from Joyce. I feel that as well, even at 55. 64, expectation of retirement. That's an interesting one. Achy joints. So you can see there's a lot, no matter what age you are, there are going to be hard things about being your age. And for some of the ones that older folks mentioned, those are real. And I'm not saying we should ignore those things at all. I'm saying we should incorporate those and contextualize them into the larger experience of aging. So now let's go and again put your age in, but what is something wonderful about being your age? And to me, the thing that I love about being my age is I have a lot more confidence now than I had when I was younger. And I think that's 100% from being aged. Experienced. 60, I can be myself. 59, grandparent. Oh, congratulations. 61, living in the moment. 24, getting to learn lots of new things. Interesting. 35, so much confidence in my skin. I love it. 62 wisdom, 51 easier to say no. Yes, much easier to say no as you get older. 27 always exploring new things. I hope that you continue to explore new things through your entire life journey. 69 lots of knowledge. Interesting. So this is an interesting exercise to do. One of the things we know from research is that multi-generational workplaces are actually the strongest, most creative workplaces. And part of why they're the strongest, most creative workplaces is people of different ages bring in these benefits of being their age. They bring in the experiences that they've had, they bring in their perspective. And when we look at people through a strength-based, asset-based, potential-based lens, we can take advantage of all of those things and make our workplace stronger as well as our library stronger. So thank you for sharing that with me. So I'm here today trying to get you to have this big, beautiful, fantastic view of aging. How do we do that? We do that by looking at research and science. We have developmental psychology, we have neurology, we have research about psychology and mental health as people age. And that gives us a fantastic picture of what it means to get older that we can use to tailor our library services to this age group in a way that brings them joy and meaning and purpose. And this concept of using research and development to serve an age group is something we already do, right? We do it with children. I know at DPL, we're very good at looking at children through a developmental lens. We look at them like birth to 3 months, 3 months to 6 months, 6 months to a year to 18 months. We're really, really, really good at looking at children, understanding their needs and behaviors, not through stereotypes, but through a true developmental lens. And so what I'm asking you and what I'm asking libraries all over the country to do is to take that same lens and apply it to older adults. And if you think about it, you're only a child for a small fraction of your life, but you're an older adult, like especially if we start at 50, like we do at DPL, potentially for a third or half your life. And so it's really important that we don't just forget about this age group or kind of push them to the margins, that we embrace them. So let's start with Carl Jung. We're gonna have a little lesson in developmental psychology for a minute. So Carl Jung, he was the great Swiss psychiatrist, and he regarded aging just as a developmental stage, just like I said. And he urged us not to just live through it, but to enjoy it. And he believed that our later years, we go beyond the roles we're assigned in life. And he said, we finally have freedom. And I notice a few of you put that, and what's the benefit of getting older is that freedom. And he said, the great gift of aging, and in fact, he called it the great task of aging, is discovery. And so I noticed a few of you who are younger talked about discovery, but that can continue. And that's part of being an older adult, is that discovery. So he viewed age as a time of dynamic creativity, and he said it encompasses internal growth, spiritual deepening, and the securing of meaning. And so if you think about that ages list we looked at the beginning, things like discovery, dynamic creativity, growth, meaning, none of those are really words necessarily that we associate with being old. But that's what he said happens. So he offered a positive, life-enhancing approach to aging. And he didn't ignore the difficulties, kind of like what I'm saying. He acknowledged that there were pain and losses, but he contextualized them into this bigger process that had meaning. And he said that people in the second half of life can work toward the possibility of this continuing creativity and fulfillment and a deepening of spirituality. And he said the key is to turn inward during the second half of life. And he said the second half of life is a journey of self-exploration and inner discovery. So he thought aging was where it was at. And he used words like discovery, growth, development, expansion, enrichment, all of those words he used when describing what it meant to get older. And some of the words we associate with aging, like isolation, depression, sad, tired, anxious, those things happen when people are not given the support, time, resources they need to move through this developmental stage. And so those are an indication of something wrong. They're not a naturally occurring aspect of aging. So Another thing that Carl Jung talked about, and this is something I think a lot about in my work, is he talked about this aspect of being older, which was a rediscovery of things. So if you think about, and this is a treasure chest, I don't know if you can tell that, but he said that all children are artists, all children are explorers, all children have this expansive view of themselves, and they don't have this inner critical coach telling them they can't, they can't, they can't. They just do, and they just experience. And he said, slowly over time, as we get older, we take these ideas about ourselves, these hopes and dreams. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a poet. I was interested in space. I loved looking at the night sky. We take all these ideas and we put them in a chest, and we put that chest deep down inside ourselves, and we close it. And we do that because of the burdens of adulthood, because we have to go to school and we have to make good grades and we have to pay off our student loans and get a job and pay our mortgage and raise our own kids and so on and so on and so on. And he talked about this wonderful gift of age as being a time where you can reach inside of yourself and pull out that chest and reopen it and look at those things again. And when you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s, opening it up and saying, I always loved painting when I was young. Maybe I'll try painting again. And you can reopen it and you can relook at these things. And he said that is the key to joy as we age. And so at DPL, when I think about programming for older adults, I think about that chest that's inside every single adult who walks into the library. And I think about how can we help them pull that chest out, open it up, and rediscover all those hopes and dreams they had about themselves. So about 50 years after Carl Jung, Gene Cohen came along. And Gene Cohen was a pioneer in the field of geriatric psychology. And he was one of the people who helped shift the emphasis in gerontological research from the problems of people as they age to their potential. And he researched thousands and thousands and thousands of older people. And he also had the benefit of MRI technology. So he had a lot of advantages that Carl Jung didn't have. And based on his research, Gene Cohen was optimistic about aging. He was really positive about it, and he wanted the world to be positive about it too. He debunked the prevailing stubborn myth that aging is negative, an illness, a stagnation, a falling apart. And he really urged us to expect positive growth with age. And he embraced, and he wanted us to embrace, scientific findings that the aging brain can form new memories and grow new cells. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And he, like Jung, said that older adulthood is filled with meaning and purpose and new learning and growth. So I'm going to go through this slide and then I'll stop and see, and maybe Christine can let me know if there are any questions. But just as there are developmental stages of childhood, there are developmental stages of adulthood. And obviously these are not rigid, these are generalizations, but I do think these are useful to think about when we think about the adults we serve in our libraries. So he identified 4 stages of maturity. So that first one, that midlife reevaluation, in our culture, we're very dismissive and kind of mean about this. And we talk about the midlife crisis, but he said it's really a quest, not a crisis. And I love that word, a quest. He called this stage of life a search for truth and meaning when we're open to life's complexities and we have a stronger sense of self. I know I feel that. I noticed some people in the chat talked about that. He said the questions during this stage that people tend to ask are things like, where have I been? Where am I now? Where am I going? It's this kind of realization that this life's journey is going to end. I'm going to assess where I'm at. Where do I want to go? Take stock. And that's a big thing that people are doing during this time period. And this is followed by this liberation period, which he called a time of experimentation and innovation. Again, not on that age list, that ageist list we looked at the beginning. And he talked about this time period as a push toward liberation, non-compliance. He talked about innovation and risk-taking. And he said the questions people ask during this time are things like, if not now, when? Why? Why not? What can they do to me? And when I think about the stage, I always think about the older people who come into the library and are like, why is it this way? Why can't it be that way? Why do you put the holds over there? Why aren't the holds here? And they're questioning all the time. And they get very grumpy about rules and regulations that don't make a lot of sense. And if you can look at their behavior through a developmental lens, it makes total sense. They're running out of time and they've been through a lot and they just kind of want to cut to the chase with us. And so I tend to be a lot more patient now with older folks who come in and are questioning why we have to do things the way we have to do them. So that's followed by the summing up phase, which is a time of review and resolution. People have a strong desire to give back. People during this phase tend to ask questions like, what is the meaning of my life? How do I give back? How do I make the world a better place? Are there unresolved conflicts I can make right? And later on, I'll talk about, if you think about each of these phases, you can think of programs to do to really meet people's needs in these phases. So for example, at DPL, we do memoir writing classes that kind of meet that need of looking back on our life and figuring out where we have been and what meaning it made. We provide opportunities for people to provide service to their community, volunteerism, because that's something that people really want to do during their older adult years. And so then the last phase is this encore phase, a time of reflection, celebration, and really importantly to remember in this phase is that learning continues along with experience and wisdom. Learning never stops. And the desire to learn and the joy of learning never stops. So I'm going to stop for just a second. And Christine, were there any questions in the chat?
I have not seen any questions yet, but
Okay.
as you were going through the slide, Shannon had reflected that at 25, they feel like they are going through kind of that quest, and they really identified with that. So I appreciated that share.
Oh yeah, I appreciate that as well. And none of this is, set in stone in terms of the ages. And obviously people will feel these things at all stages of their life. But it's just kind of a generalization about things that people start experiencing more predominantly as they reach certain age places on their aging timeline.
Yeah, and Marie just put a question in chat that I believe we will get to towards the end of the session, but she said that she would love to hear more about your memoir writing classes and who teaches them. But I believe there's a whole section where you talk about some of your programs.
Yes, there is. So I will get to that. Thanks, Marie. And I will try to remember to do that. And I'm sure Christine will help me remember. So kind of leaving the developmental stages behind, just a reminder or maybe an introduction to the concept of developmental intelligence. We have a stereotype in our culture that aging brains are deficient brains, that they're worse than younger brains. And that's actually not true. What we know is that older brains are different from younger brains. And they actually have there are some ways in which they're stronger. There are some ways in which they're not quite as sharp, but it's not a matter of worse or better. It's really a matter of difference. And one of the differences is this concept of developmental intelligence. And this is, I think, what we refer to colloquially as wisdom, right? This is thinking that just is not possible when we're young because it's based on experience. It's based on trying, failing, learning, watching, experiencing over a whole lifetime. I know I have more developmental intelligence now than I did when I was 45, than I did when I was 35. I'm sure the people on this call who are in their 20s feel more wiser than they did when they were teens. I think this is something we all intuitively know. But for whatever reason, culturally, when we look at older adults, we don't see or understand that developmental intelligence is there. But it really is. And I think it's wonderful to give people an opportunity to share it and to shine when they have this developmental intelligence. And I do love this quote from Gene Cohen, because I don't think in our culture we think of aging or being old as a gift or as having gifts. But he definitely believed that some of our most precious gifts can only be acquired as we get older. So another thing to know about is this concept of neuroplasticity, which I'm sure you all know about because you're librarians and we talk about it a lot with children. But neuroplasticity means our brain can change and adapt through our entire lifetime. So people can continue learning, and not just learning facts, but they can learn new ways of being in the world. They can grow, they can understand, they can develop. And so there's no point at which you just give up on someone. And I think this concept is super important to remind our patrons of. I get a lot of patrons who come in with this internalized ageism, which I'll also talk about in a little while, and they don't realize that they can keep learning. They think that it's all time's up for them. And I really encourage them to realize, no, you can keep learning just like everyone else. So this is a really important concept. At DPL, we do a lot of creative aging, and creative aging is a really specific kind of programming. It is not macaroni glued to a paper plate. It's not childish. It's really, there are programs around creative engagement that recognize the artist within someone, and they're skill building, and they're really beautiful programs. And I'll talk about them more in a minute when I talk about programming. But I don't think there's a better just kind of description of the potential than creative engagement. So when we talk about human potential in the second half of life, I think we really have to also talk about creativity and not forget that older adults can be creative, just like children can be creative. We do a lot of fostering creativity in children. And so through creative aging, we sort of take that same desire and we foster creativity in older adults. So as I was saying, the changes in the brain as we age are not necessarily bad. They are sometimes different, or they're not necessarily worse. So for example, the brain's emotional circuitry becomes more balanced. It goes calmer. And older brains are actually more complex brains. For example, younger people tend to use one hemisphere or the other. Older people tend to use both at the same time. And that creates a complexity of thinking, an ability to hold a paradox, an ability to tolerate nuance and gray area that is not so easy in younger brains. And it has to do with this architectural circuitry being more complicated in older brains. There's similar research on emotions as we age, that older people don't just become worse. They're just different. They have strengths as they get older. They tend to have stronger desires than younger people, but they tend to be able to modulate, regulate, resist those desires. They tend to be more positive, have more positive emotions than negative ones. I don't know if you're familiar with the happiness curve, which shows that there tends to be a dip in your 30s, 40s, even 50s, and then it goes up. People tend to get happier as they get older, and they're better able to be more present. So this is a quote from the Wall Street Journal it had a long research article on emotions as we age. And I think it's a really good quote because we do have this stereotype of older people as grumpy and curmudgeonly, maybe a little sad. And the research actually does not bear that out at all. And so I think it's an understatement to say it needs some revision. So I want to talk a little bit about ageism because any work around older adults has to really deal with ageism head on. Ageism is something that is so baked into our culture, it's almost like people aren't even aware of it. I would say just about every day, a staffer or a patron at DPL will say something to me that's ageist and not even be aware of it. And so ageism can go both ways. There can be, I think somebody mentioned in the chat, a few people being younger and feeling ageism come at them. And that is definitely a thing. It typically, I talk about it when it comes to older people because that's my work, but also the negative impacts of ageism tend to be more extreme when it comes to older people. It tends to impact their physical and mental health in a profound way. And it's actually linked to earlier decline and death. So it's definitely worth addressing ageism in your work. And the thing about ageism is the one ism that is really impacts all of us, right? And when we talk about ageism against older people, it is prejudice against our kind of feared future self. And I do think ageism is very, very closely aligned with ableism, this idea that the only valuable bodies in our society are able bodies, right? Our young, healthy bodies. Is definitely something I see when it comes to ageism. It's also aligned with sizeism and other kind of isms based on physical appearance and health. And so it, you know, as with everything, there's not clear lines, but I think it definitely blurs into those problems as well. So I call ageism kind of a self-inflicted harm, and it's something to really understand about yourself and the people you love. If you have negative feelings toward older people in general, you're more likely to struggle with negative feelings as you get older, because all of those stereotypes and negative feelings that you've held toward other people are slowly going to turn onto you as you age. And that has real implications for your own health. There's a lot of research that shows if you have negative feelings about your own aging, you're less likely to age in a healthy and happy way. And so that's also something to think about in our patrons. I am constantly trying to get our patrons to challenge their own ageist beliefs about themselves, because I think that is the key to helping them have a happy, healthy older adulthood. So just looking at some types of ageism, there's that cultural ageism that I'm sure you're all aware of. Those are the kind of everyday negative messages that you see about older people in TV. And once you become aware of it, it's constant, the ageism in our popular culture. Like the jokes at the expense of older people, the plot lines that turn on older people being sad, pathetic, and weak and helpless. It just starts to, if once you notice it, it's almost overwhelming. A statistic I find really interesting is only 1.5% of the characters on television are older people. And most of them have only minor roles, and they're often portrayed for comic effect. So, drawing on stereotypes about physical, cognitive, or sexual ineffectiveness. So, only 1.5%, but there are actually more people over 50 in our culture than there are under 18 now in our country. And so we are an aging country, but our popular culture does not reflect that. And so I've also talked a little bit today already about this internalized ageism. This is really important to start to be aware of and challenge in ourselves and our patrons. It's how we feel about ourselves as older people. So it's things like comments like, "Oh, I lost my keys. I'm getting old. I can't remember that. I'm getting old." Never mind that younger people also lose things and they also forget things. It's also comments like, "I can't learn that. I'm too old." Um, I'm getting old. I don't understand email. It's like this tick that people have. I notice it a lot. I actually have somebody in one of my programs, before he asks any question, he says, "I'm sorry, I'm old, so I don't know this." And I'm always think to myself, I don't know what he's apologizing for. Not dying, like why apologize for being older? And I think he is feeling the ageism in the culture, and he's feeling the culture's desire to push people like him to the margins. So internalized ageism can also be older people marginalizing and discriminating against other older people, which happens all the time. So yes, I'm no good with computers. Exactly. It's that thing. And sometimes I think people not being able to do things is really just their ageism telling them they can't do it. And if a library staff member says, "No, you can do it," it really is a powerful message to them. So one of the types of ageism I see in libraries all the time is this benevolent ageism. And this is very subtle. This is kind of the patronizing, paternalistic beliefs that older people need our help. So the minute people think of older adult services or they think of senior services, the first thing that comes to mind is a helpless group of people that needs us to intervene in their lives. And it's not that some older people don't need our help. It's just don't assume that they need to be protected and taken care of. And one of the things I talk about with this is during the pandemic, the assumption was that older people were going to be hurt the most by the isolation, that they were the most helpless group during the pandemic. But as we've come kind of out of it, or as we've come into this new stage, the research is starting to show that actually older people were the most resilient group during the pandemic, and that it was really younger people who suffered the most. And so that assumption actually hurt both groups in some ways, right? The ageism kind of went both ways and hurt both groups. So just kind of watch yourself when you think about what older people might need, and don't assume that they're going to be weak or need to be taken care of by younger people. And so implicit ageism, implicit bias, I'm sure you all know what that is. That's attitudes, feelings, behaviors toward a people of another group that operate without conscious awareness. So I'm not going to spend much time on that because that's something we're all aware of. And I really like this quote, American, because I think it really applies to public libraries. I think you could put public libraries in for Americans, and that would be accurate. Americans have been socialized to understand the problems and pathology of old age. What they do not understand is the great potential for activity, happiness, and wellness throughout a long life. So I'm going to leave you with that quote. So we have a poll that I think Christine's going to put in there. And I always love to ask this question because I'm curious. Have you ever been the victim of ageism? Because 100% so far. Yeah. I'll let all of you answer. But I am not surprised by this. And a few no's coming in. That's interesting. 3 no's. And the older one. Yeah. And I feel like the way I asked this question was maybe not the best, but the overwhelming majority of you have experienced ageism either because of your youth or because of your age. And that's not good, right? That's not good. And it must not have felt good for you. And so then think about our patrons and what they experience. I think it's really important that I am on a mission to make age part of DEI or EDI. That it is an ism that is impactful and damaging and should be addressed by public libraries. Okay, we can move on, Christine. All right, so the prevalence of ageism. We saw what you all said. 93% of folks said they've experienced ageism in their day-to-day lives. And all of this is kind of research. This is based on research. ARP looked at older adults, and 93% said they experienced age discrimination in the workplace. So think about that. If you're experiencing it in the workplace, what does that mean for your satisfaction with your work? What does it mean for your ability to kind of grow in your work? What does it mean for your economic security if you're experiencing that? This third one I think is really sobering. 56% of folks in their 50s are pushed out of the workplace or laid off. So what they did was they looked at people in their 50s with stable employment. So this was not people precarious to begin with. They had stable employment and they had positive reviews and were tended to be well regarded in their jobs. But even so, 56% of them were pushed out or laid off. And I can tell you it's very hard to look for a job in your 50s. It's hard in your 40s, but it gets much harder in your 50s. 38% of hiring managers admit to reviewing resumes with age bias. So those are the ones who are aware of the bias. And then beyond that, admit to it. I can't even imagine how many don't admit to it or aren't aware of the bias. So the prevalence of ageism is pretty overwhelming. Obviously, and I'm sure you know this, it intersects and compounds other forms of ageism. So if you are an older African-American woman, if you are an older person with a disability, if you're an older person who also identifies as LGBTQ, that's going to compound your experience in our culture. We'll talk about this in a minute, but ageist beliefs are internalized at a very young age. Ageist beliefs have a real impact on our health. And there's been some groundbreaking research out of Yale about this. Ageism in American medicine is a matter of life and death. So there's a lot of ageism in medicine. I was getting a cavity filled the other day and my dentist asked me how old I was. And I was kind of like, why do you even need to know that? And so there is a movement in American medicine to talk about your age, not in terms of your chronological age, but kind of your health age, like to look at other indicators of your health, like blood pressure and your heart rate and things like that, and to not really focus on people's chronological age because it's not a good indicator at all. Obviously, ageism can hurt us on the job, and it really does decrease our financial security. So I want to talk a bit about children because we all work with children in the library. Some of us have children, some of us are librarians at schools. Children as young as 3 express ageist ideas and attitudes. That's really sad to me. And they are anxious about their own aging journey. And a lot of research has shown that in picture books, movies designed for children, games designed for children, different things that we do with children, they actually promote these ageist beliefs. And they're really damaging to children and to our culture in general. Older people tend to be portrayed as sad, sick, lonely, grumpy, forgetful. And we just did an audit of our picture books because I was trying to create a list of 100 age positive picture books to promote in our story times. And it was really hard. There actually weren't a lot. And one of the common themes in the picture books was a sweet old person who needed the child to help them. The child was the protagonist of the story. So it might be the child holding the person's hand and crossing the street with them. It might be the child helping them remember something. It might be the child helping them with a task. And while that is maybe a very sweet thing for the child, a sweet lesson to child, if we step back and think about what message does it give the children about what it means to be old, and really how realistic is it that a 3-year-old would help an older person with a task or help an older person across the street? And so being mindful that people are not fully human if they are just an object of pity or an object of help or an object of, or being used as an object to make another person in the story seem stronger. And so even when a book seems to have a good theme, even when it seems sweet and positive, it might kind of underneath actually be pretty ageist and damaging as far as the attitudes it's kind of putting into a child's head. So at DPL, we look at aging and not ageism. And aging is kind of this slow, steady process of change that ultimately leads us to becoming our unique individual selves. We are all aging, right? It's a vital part of our human identity and our human condition. And it's not all pretty. Like life is not all pretty. Aging is just another word for living, is a quote that I like to say a lot. It involves hard-earned life lessons and experiences, but it is the process that enables us to become fully realized human beings. And so ultimately, it is a beautiful process, and it's something we're all doing. So age positivity is it's associated with increased longevity. There's a researcher out of Yale named Becca Levy who actually said, she put a number on it, 7.5 years longer life if you have age positive beliefs. She showed that you have better physical and mental health if you are positive about aging. You have a greater ability to recover from setbacks, and you have a reduced likelihood of dementia by almost half, which that is pretty profound. So I encourage all of you to embrace aging and to help your patrons embrace aging. So really quick, and I know we're getting a little short on time, I want to talk about what we do at Denver Public Library. So as I said, we start at 50 plus, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One, honestly, has to do with funding. There are several funders that start at 50. AARP starts at 50. But another reason has to do with adult development. And there is a thing that happens at 50 where life becomes a little more about loss than it is about attainment. Your children grow up and leave home. Maybe a parent dies. Maybe both your parents die. You get a divorce. You begin to plateau at your job. Life just sort of changes a little bit to the point where somebody in their 50s probably has more in common with someone in their 60s than they do with someone in their 40s. Again, that's not exactly, going to be true of everyone, but it's just something that kind of tends to happen. So it makes sense to start at 50. And that means that for us, it's many stages of life. It's people still raising children, people still working full time, people preparing for retirement. It's people who are trying to enjoy a fantastic retirement, people preparing for end of life. It's also a broad spectrum of needs. 30% of the people experiencing homelessness on the streets of Denver are older adults, and they're also dealing with a lot of other health conditions. It's people who may be dealing with food insecurity, economic insecurity, people dealing with grief and loss, people wanting to figure out how to learn something new, how to travel, how to have a fantastic older adulthood. It's a really broad spectrum. I always look at intersectionality in my work, so that we talked about that a little bit earlier, but your experience of aging is going to be impacted by other aspects of your identity, your gender, your sexual orientation, your race, your national origin, what language you speak, your economic situation. So there is a lot of intersectionality in my work. And I do take this potential-based view instead of a deficit-based view. I root everything I do in the developmental stages of aging and that neurology of the aging brain. We talked about those emotional and personality changes. I align everything with what we do, and I use a lot of data and evaluation. So I evaluate my programs to make sure they are meeting my goals. I'm going to skip that slide. So now I'm going to talk about programs. So I'm sure you can think about a ton of great programs based on what we've talked about, beyond sort of the usual library programs of book clubs, which are wonderful. I'm in a book club and I love them, but beyond like knitting circles and book clubs and history lectures, all of which are good. So here are some of the programs we've done. As I said, we do art classes. We have maker spaces at DPL called Idea Labs, which have like 3D printers and laser cut machines and tools and computers and recording studios. And I think the maybe stereotype is those are for younger people, but we do a lot of intentional programming. We have some wonderful librarians and library programming associates who do wonderful programming in the Idea Labs to specifically invite older adults in. We do advanced tech classes. So often people think of older adults and they think of rudimentary tech classes, but we also meet that need for advanced technology. We've done singing group, songwriting classes, autobiography writing, memoir writing. Somebody asked about that earlier. We did hire a presenter to do a memoir writing class, and it was wonderful. It went extremely well. People loved it. We had a long waiting list for the class. And actually, that group of people, I think the class was only 6 sessions. I can't remember exactly, but that was a year ago, and that group of people is still meeting together without a presenter to keep working on their memoirs, which I think is wonderful. We do like the walking group. I've started a biking group for older adults. I think that's one of those things that it can be perceived as being for younger people, and it's maybe a little bit scary to start biking. And so we do a biking club and we bike through different parts of Denver and we explore different parts of Denver together. Older adults definitely, I think we saw this in a slide, they have a greater ability to be present and to be truly mindful. And so I really lean into that. And we do a lot of meditation classes. We've done Qigong classes, which is kind of this moving meditation. Cooking, gardening. We do a lot of intergenerational programming. So I've done programming with students at the University of Denver, with children, with high school students, programs that meet the developmental needs of both age groups, but intentionally bring those age groups together. Those programs are really wonderful, and they have a huge impact on both age groups. The young people benefit as much as the older people from these programs. As I said, I think of volunteering not as just something older adults do for libraries, but as a program that libraries provide for older adults. Volunteerism is a really important. When we think about small business help, we have done some programs specifically for older folks. One of the largest groups of people, of new small business owners, actually are older folks. So people over the age of 50. So providing them the inspiration, the support. Solo aging is a big thing. Getting older alone is hard. And so providing support and resources around that experience is something really important to do. As I said earlier, one of the things that you can't escape about getting older is the losses do tend to accumulate. And so that means grief. And so we do programming about grief and loss. We also do the Memory Cafe, which is a program for people with dementia and Alzheimer's and their friends, family members, and caregivers. And we do other programming for that community as well, but it's actually the most fun I have in my week is the Memory Cafe. And I do a separate training on that, and I'm happy for people to email me about that if they want to find out more. And then financial wellness is really a fancy way or a not so sad way of saying programming for people on the financial margins who need help. They need help maybe living on Social Security. They need help signing up for Medicaid. They need help living on a budget or figuring out housing. So we do a lot of programming around that. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little. I see people are asking about specific programs. So I have a few photos of specific programs and then we'll wrap up. This is a picture of a creative aging class. And as I said, creative aging classes are really intentional in terms of the skill building that happens. We treat older adults like artists and teach them the skills they need. They tend to be sequential classes to think of themselves as artists, to learn how to paint, to learn how to draw, to learn how to do ceramics. This is a picture from a ceramic class that we did. I love this picture. I love the bird she created. This is a program we do every year in partnership with the University of Denver, which is called Photography and Memory. And I love this program. It matches DU photography students with older adults in the community. And I have to admit, when I started this program, I was ageist. I had ageist attitudes, and I thought, how nice, we're going to be really nice to these older people and have them interact with young people, and it's going to make the older people happy. And I didn't really think about how much the younger people would benefit from interacting with the older people. And in fact, when we did the evaluation of this program, the impact was even greater on the younger people than the older people. They really needed the grounding influence of being around older people who had been through life and been through some of the hard things that the younger people were anticipating having to go through. This is drumming at Memory Cafe. So we do a lot of music at Memory Cafe. This is a program we just finished up and we're going to be doing again in the fall, called the All Seasons Choir. This was another intergenerational program where it was actually multi-generational. We had people from ages 16 all the way to 92 singing together weekly in this community choir. It was really, really beautiful. This is a poetry slam. We do a lot of poetry classes. People love the poetry classes. They really, really love them. This is a walking group that we do. The walking group, you can either program it and have people come talk about birds or talk about the plants or the trees you see, or you can just walk together. It can be as complicated or as simple as you want. This is the memoir writing class. I actually think memoir writing is kind of the perfect program for libraries because we have the resources and the expertise to help people research parts of their history, parts of their community's history to add to their memoirs. So it's a really natural class for libraries to lead. This isn't a picture of my biking group, but this is a biking group. This is at a library and I can't remember which one. But you might not think of a biking group for a library, but when you think about lifelong learning, community, connection, combating ageism, giving people an opportunity to lead a healthy lifestyle, biking is kind of part of that. This is Qigong, which is part of the mindfulness and meditation programming that we do for older adults. And this is a picture. This is actually not from DPL, but this is from a library in New Jersey. And this woman made a vase in a 3D printer. So this is from a 3D printing class from older adults. This program I always like to talk about with that concept of neuroplasticity in mind. During the pandemic, during kind of the Black Lives Matter movement, we have a community in Denver called Windsor Gardens, which is an older adult community. It is 3,000 people over the age of 65 live in this community. And they were having challenges dealing with race in their community. And they came to me and they said, can you help us? Can you facilitate some programming around race? And my initial instinct was, no, I don't want to do that, because I was afraid of how hard it would be, the difficult conversations we had. And I had this stereotype of how people would come to the program. And I was flat wrong. So I'm proud to say we did do the programming. We had 80 people come. They were open-minded, eager to learn, eager to connect. They wanted to grow. They wanted to learn from each other. It was amazing. It was the most incredible, one of the most incredible programs I've done. This group of people, this older group of people, which really goes against the stereotype, they just wanted to challenge themselves and become better people and more connected people and improve their community. And I was really glad that we at the library had a role to play in that. And so I guess my message is don't shy away from hard topics when you think about older adults. Don't shy away from challenging topics. Don't think you need to patronize them. Don't think you need to make things safe for them. They're grown-ups. They can handle it. They really can. And they might surprise you like they surprised me. And this is a photo of an older adult with a recording studio that I just really love. So that is my spiel. We have about 5 minutes left. I don't know if there were questions in the chat that I didn't address, but I can pause here with the last little bit. I also just want to encourage you, my email was at the beginning, and I'm sure Christine will probably send it out, but feel free to email me if you have questions or comments or anything. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the presentation, Erin.
Yeah, I think we got to everybody's questions. One of the questions was about music, and there were lots of examples that you shared and other people shared in the chat about music.
Oh, good.
I'll invite people to continue to share. I know we only have a couple minutes left, but either continue to share in chat, or in just a moment, I'm going to put my email in chat as well. If you have programs or things that you would like to kind of share, I'm happy to share URLs and that kind of stuff when I share the recording as we go through. And we're getting a lot of thank you and comments about it changing perception about older people. Really wanting to bring these ideas to the library. One of the attendees was going to share with their board. And very early on, as you were talking about kind of that intersectionality and talking about how like ageism can lead to, you know, sizeism and all of these other things, someone had also mentioned kind of how we view people who think differently. So all of the neurodiversity and that kind of thing. I think
so
they
glad
all
mentioned that. Yes, I'm so glad.
So yeah, they kind of all play in together, and it's just sort of like if we can learn to appreciate what people bring to the table instead of what we think they might not. So I think
I think we should view everyone through like a potential based, positive based lens, right? That's so important. I'm glad somebody mentioned that. One thing that I didn't address in my training that I'm sure is on everybody's mind is like budget and cost and how do we pay for doing some of these things. Some of that is just reallocating what you're doing already. Like you might, reallocating your resources and just making older adults a priority, or understanding that some of what you're already doing, you can keep doing, but specifically inviting older adults. Like when I talked about the Idea Labs or maker spaces, we're already doing programs in them, but really with intentionality, invite older adults in with the pictures we use on the promotional materials, with our language. And so some of it you can do and it won't cost a cent, right? A lot of what I do with community partners. There are a lot of organizations in your community who are serving older adults or who are doing things like, for example, the Denver Art Museum. I partner with them a lot. They also want to reach older adults. So we partner together, we share resources so it doesn't cost as much. The University of Denver, if there are, I use high school art teachers sometimes. They just want to earn a little extra money, so they'll teach my art classes. So just, you can be creative. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It really doesn't. That should not be a reason not to do the work. And it's definitely completely free to change your perspective.
We did have one question. Somebody was talking about how they have a little bit of trouble developing programs for visiting senior homes where there's a mix of abilities. And I didn't know if you had anything that you could speak to that.
We have that as well. People will bring shuttles of people. And I think that's where, and we tend to do this for children, but it is about individualizing what you're doing and trying to create programs that can operate on a number of different levels, so that if somebody is really great and doing extremely well on aging in kind of the most healthy, functional way, there are aspects of the program they can enjoy and be challenged by, but also having parts of the program that will also work for people who are maybe dealing with a little bit of dementia, maybe dealing with some physical challenges. It's a matter of really thoughtfully crafting a program so that you can individualize what happens in the program.
Okay, so we are right at the end of our time. I put my email in the chat. If anybody needs a certificate for today, just pop me an email, and hopefully within the next couple days, I will get you an email. I also added Amy's email to the chat just in case you had additional questions for Amy. And then we would love to know what you thought about today's session. I believe when you log off, the survey will automatically be pulled up, but it's on the screen. You can click on it, and I'm going to pop that into chat as well. But most importantly, I wanted to say a huge thank you to Amy for sharing all of this great information. I mentioned it a couple times in chat, but I will be posting the recording of today's session along with the slides so that you can share them with other people. They will be posted on the Libraries Learn website, which you can, which is not on the screen. I will pull it up.
It's there, Christine, or you have the link there.
That goes to the survey.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, I was like, eh. Anyway, in 2 seconds, Christine will pop that into the chat. But that's where the archive and the slides and other resources will be posted, hopefully by tomorrow. And I've got other things, unfortunately, that I have to do this afternoon. So the archive will be forthcoming. And then I also wanted to give a huge thanks to our captioner for the live captioning for today's session. But we really appreciate everybody attending today and engaging with this topic. And we'll see you soon with another CSL in session.